Hi, darlings, me again. Okay, so launching straight into this, what we're going to have a look at now is the first section that you're going to be completing with your paper two. And section A, as we've already said, links directly into is 35 marks, which equates across to standard time as 35 minutes. I've worked all of this out. So if I'm looking backwards and forwards, that's what I'm doing. With regards to extra time, that means you have about 44 to 45 minutes for this section if you're on extra time. If you want a recap on that, go back to the overview video and it goes through how you should calculate your timings in the exam. So the next question I'm sure on everyone's lips rather is, what on earth is in this section? You know this, so please don't start panicking. This is looking typically at the urbanization element of it. This is looking at your city case studies. So this is looking at Lagos and this is looking at London. And it's not just a case of saying, oh, yeah, I know where Lagos is, I know where London is, therefore I'm fine. You need to know them inside out and back to front in order to be able to do well in this section. With regards to the way that I'm going to talk you through this, I'm going to go through kind of overriding generic themes. I'm not going to sit here and go through every single detail about Lagos and every single detail about London, but I am going to hopefully give you enough information that you can say, oh, I need to go and revisit this, or I'm not sure that I'm completely happy on this section, and you can go back and have a look at it. The key kind of overriding themes here, first one is urbanization. So what is urbanization? And it's not just the idea of saying, oh, it's that thing where people move from the countryside to the city. It's making sure that you know these key terms. It's the idea that, urbanization is the proportion of people who are living in urban areas. And that's kind of the key element to it. You then, by all means, go on and talk about the idea of rural to urban migration. Fantastic. You start talking about the fact that urbanization is happening at a faster rate in LICs and NEEs than it is in HICs. You can then start getting thoroughly overexcited and talking about counter urbanization, the idea that once a country and once an area becomes more developed, people actually want to start living in the countryside, as we saw in COVID, rather than moving to the city. But make sure when you're looking at these elements, you don't just look at it and say, right, urbanization is this, I've done it. You need to look at it and then look around the whole element as well. Okay. This idea also ties into kind of migration. So we're talking about the movement of people. We're talking about why is it that population might change within a city. We're looking at this idea of natural increase compared to, or versus why people are moving in and out of cities at different rates. So make sure you understand kind of those key terminologies. This is where it comes into this idea of push and pull factors. So what are the push factors that are meaning people want to move away from the countryside? And what are the pull factors that are saying, well, actually, I'm being attracted to the city? Push factors are going to be things like lack of jobs in urban areas, lack of healthcare, lack of education opportunities, all of those things. Pull factors are going to be things like huge numbers of services. So you've got access to a range of different doctors, hospitals, schools. You're going to say, well, actually, there's a huge leisure provision. So therefore, you can go to all manner of different restaurants or cinemas or whatever it might be. We could go on and on and on about this for ages, but that's what you need to make sure you're looking at. It's not just, I know what urbanization means, therefore I'm fine. So make sure you look at that in detail. This is then launching largely into your case study material. Case studies in paper two are really, really important. In the same breath, so is knowing the detail and not just waffling on about something that once upon a time you saw about Lagos on a documentary or something like that. You've got to be precise. The reason that this is a tricky paper is because people see one word in the title and then just write everything they know about the question that they wanted it to be asking. You can't do that. Okay, that's just not going to get you the high marks. You need to make sure you're breaking down the question. What specific element, for example, is it asking you about Lagos? And you answer that question, not, oh yes, it says Lagos, or doesn't even say Lagos, it says an Neelic. I'm going to write everything down I've ever found out about Lagos. All right. So what kind of things do you need to be making sure that you know? You need to be able to know things like, where is it? Which continent is it in? Hopefully, you know that it's Africa. Please remember, Lagos is not the capital of Nigeria. Abuja is the capital of Nigeria. Historically, when Nigeria became independent, the decision by the Nigerian government was to move the capital from Lagos to Abuja. Lagos is on the coast, Abuja is inland. So Lagos is still largely the financial center of Nigeria, but it is not the capital. So bear that in mind, please. What other things are you going to be able to know? You need to know things like, what are we looking at with regards to the GDP? Okay, so we know that Nigeria is an NEE. It has a rapidly growing population, and it also has a GDP which is growing. So it's got the highest GDP of any country in Africa. So that's worth bearing in mind, but you need to have a look at why that is the case. So make sure when you're going through your notes, you're looking at that and picking out the key bits and bobs. You need to know about its importance regionally, so kind of smaller scale, nationally for the whole country, why is it important, and then internationally. So why does London care what's happening in Lagos, for example? These are things that you need to make sure that you're working through. You've got to make sure that you have an understanding of the growth of Lagos. What's happened to its population? Has it increased? Has it decreased? Hopefully, you will remember, there's lots of hopefullys here, that Lagos, once upon a time, many, many moons ago, was a fishing village, fishing town. So the population has grown exponentially. This then links us perfectly into making sure that you're remembering different elements. So you need to look at Makoko. You need to look at this idea of the slum, the slum on stilts, if you remember, where they get around with boats. It's absolutely thriving with regards to informal economy in Makoko, but you've got to make sure that you talk about that as well as the likes, or learn about that as well as the likes of Echo Atlantic. So how they are trying to develop the city with kind of the same breath there. You need to go through kind of social opportunities, economic opportunities. So opportunities essentially are talking about the good things. So you need to have a look at it and go, okay, well, what good is actually coming out of Lagos? Because it all sounds a little bit negative at the moment. Absolutely not. But have a look at this. So look at things like access to medicine, access to healthcare, access to education within Lagos itself. So they all fall into social ideas. Look at, what proportion of people have access to electricity. That's increasing. You would even things like water treatment plants. Make sure that you've had a look at all of these so that you understand them. And then linking across to the economic side of things, have a look at the banks, the governance, what's going on there, even things like the money that Nollywood brings in. Make sure you've got a summary of that. That said, you've got to look at the other side of things too. So the problems that have come and the problems that are associated with massive urban growth in Lagos. So we're going to be talking about things like the slums and squatter settlements, which is where Makoko comes back in again. Counteract that though, remember, your however for Makoko is the floating school, was the floating school. So there is an attempt to be more positive there. Kind of a more negative as well is going to be things like access to clean water, access to sanitation, access to electricity. Make sure you go through and have a look at those. Things like, again, access to healthcare, access to education. Is it a case of if you live in Lagos, you have access to all of these things? Or is it a case of depending on where you live in Lagos? And just make sure that you have a summary of that in your brain. And the final kind of challenges I suggest that you have a look at are things like crime. So make sure you've considered crime, make sure you've considered unemployment, the idea of the formal economy versus the informal economy. The kind of, with that as well comes environmental issues. So there are massive environmental issues. If you remember when we looked back at the documentary that we watched ages ago now, we looked at things like fish being sold, the way that they're melting down different types of rubber and such like, and tires and things in order to be able to then reuse the materials, but how bad that was for the environment, how bad that was for their health. So again, have a look at those. I'm storming through this, so please feel free to pause it at any point. I'm very aware that we've only got a set amount of time. Other things for Lagos, you need to look at urban planning schemes. So what do I mean by that? Kind of what they are doing, what the government are doing to improve the life of residents in Lagos. So things like you need to look at social benefits. So access to free education would be an example of that. You need to look at economic benefits. You need to look at environmental benefits. There are lots of areas to have a look at. Look in your notes. Make sure you're using the revision guide as well. It will help you. So we're going to switch target to the UK. So we've done a little bit on Lagos. The UK, you've got to have an outline understanding, and you've got this from Rivers and Coasts anyway, of the different areas of where cities are found in the UK, where the highland areas are, where the lower land areas are, where the kind of main financial hubs are, where London is, where Liverpool is, where Manchester is, and such like. Linked into that, how the cities are made up. So the idea that in the middle you've got the central business district, and as you come further out, you've then got things like the suburbs, the inner city, you've got the rural to urban fringe. What does that mean? What does that look like for housing? Make sure you look at that. Okay, so your UK example of a city is London. This is where we went, if you remember, back in year 10 when we had a look at Kew Gardens, and then we went over to London and Stratford. That's your case study for this. So you've got to have a look at why it is that London is such an important part of the UK. So think about historically where it's located on a river, where it's located in a lowland area, its access to Europe, all of those different elements. Just consider that. Linked into that, migration. Think about internal migration, so migration that happens within the UK, and then international migration, which is people travelling to London from different areas. Why might people do that? It's push and pull factors again. It's different to an LIC or an NEE. This is largely driven by jobs, opportunities, families, and such like, but have a look at that. When we're talking about it, you've got to break it down into social opportunities as well as economic opportunities and environmental opportunities. So just make sure you look at those. Same breath, you then need to do the same for challenges. So what challenges does it bring having this idea of changing UK cities when we're talking about London? So things like environmental challenges are going to be things like dereliction. Social and economic challenges are going to be things like urban deprivation, having areas that are poorer, having areas that are wealthier. Make sure that you have a look back at the different areas that we looked at in relation to which areas are wealthier and which areas are struggling. Things kind of spurring off from there, you've got the rural urban fringe, you've got the idea of urban sprawl. So that once upon a time the city of London was tiny and it got bigger and bigger and bigger, so now it incorporates all of the boroughs. Think about the work that we did related to the wealth in those different boroughs, who lives where and such like, and that's a key bit of importance there. You need to have a look at regeneration projects. That's Stratford. Stratford was an incredibly deprived area that then had money pumped into it for the Olympics, but then the hard and the soft legacies that were left after that are still what remain, or hopefully what remain now. Sustainable urban living is another element that you've got to have a look at. So within Stratford, what are the sustainable parts of it? Make sure that you're looking. If you remember when we looked at East Village, the old athletes' village, how are they making that sustainable? What's going on? Secondly to that, this idea of sustainable urban living, encouraging people to live with the greenery rather than against the greenery. Recycling projects, so important. And I think kind of the final bit I'm going to say on this, before I move on to the next one, is this idea of traffic management. You've got to make sure that you have a thorough understanding for both Lagos and London of what they're trying to do to manage traffic. So if you think about Lagos, you've got the train systems that they're implementing and trying to get people and encourage people to use those systems. In London, you've got huge amounts of public transport. You've got the ULEZ zones. You've got the congestion charge. You need to know how much they're costing. When do they work? What are the pros and cons of them? How does it help traffic flow? How does it help the larger kind of greenery side of things and such like? But that's kind of a very brief summary. and we'll stop there. I hope that was helpful. Thank you.